Section 7. Introduction to File Organization. Introduction. Organizing a file depends on what kind of file it happens to be. A file in the simplest form can be a text file, e.g., a file which is composed of only ASCII text. Files can also be created as binary or executable types containing elements other than plain text. Also, files are keyed with attributes which help determine their use by the host operating system. When a file is saved on disk, the file system uses some criteria to decide the way in which it will be stored. In this study session, you will learn the various criteria used to make this decision. An explanation will first be given on what file organization is. Learning outcomes. At the end of this study session, you should be able to 1. Discuss file organization. 2. Explain major criteria for selecting a type of file organization. 3. Discuss file naming conventions. File organization. File organization is the methodology which is applied to structure computer files. Given that a file consists, generally speaking, of a collection of records, a key element in file management is the way in which the records themselves are organized inside the file, since this heavily affects system performances as far as record finding and access. Files contain computer records which can be documents or information which is stored in a certain way for later retrieval. File organization refers primarily to the logical arrangement of data in a file system. This should not be confused with the physical storage of the file in some types of storage media. The term file organization refers to a relationship of the key of the record to the position of that record in the logical file. There are two objectives of a computer-based file organization: ease of file creation and maintenance, provision of an efficient means of storing and retrieving information. The selection of a particular file organization depends upon a range of factors such as file use ratio, file activity, file volatility, file size, and user requirements. Major criteria for selecting a type of file organization: file use ratio, hit ratio or activity ratio, file volatility, file size, user requirement. Let's examine the major criteria for selecting a type of file organization. File use ratio, file activity. If we divide the number of records that are accessed within a specified process or period by the total number of records in the file, we can calculate the file use ratio hit rate. If the ratio is high, it indicates that the majority of records are used regularly, which means sequential serial file organization may be the appropriate method. On the other hand, if the ratio is low, say 5% to 10%, then the implication is that the ability to retrieve a desired record quickly is crucial, and therefore direct file organization should be recommended. Let's illustrate file activity using 3 examples. A. Payroll production. An example of a high activity file. In most, if not all, organizations' production of payroll and pay slips is a regular event which can be either weekly or monthly. Such an application requires processing of all or nearly all the employee records, and therefore the file use ratio will be close to or equal to 100%. Thus, sequential file organization is preferred. B. Customer accounts in banks. An example of a medium activity file. This is an application in which both random and sequential access are required. For example, several customers should be able to withdraw cash from an ATM simultaneously and randomly, and the bank should be able to update all customer accounts periodically by sequential processing. Indexed sequential file organization may therefore be the most suited to this type of application. C. Airline ticket reservations. An example of a low activity file. In most cases, only one record is accessed at a time. This record is required quickly, and therefore direct accessing is most appropriate. Calculating the file use ratio. To calculate the file use ratio, we need to know the number of records accessed and the number of records in the file. Examples: a file has 8,000 records, 250 of which are accessed and updated per week. Calculate the FUR. File use ratio is equal to 250 over 8000 is equal to 0.03125 per week, very low. If for the same file, 4100 records are accessed per week, file use ratio is equal to 4100 over 8000 is equal to 0.5125 per week, medium. If all but 400 were accessed weekly, that is 7600 accessed per week, then file use ratio is equal to 7600 over 8000 is equal to 0.95 per week, very high. 1. File volatility. File volatility is the frequency with which additions and deletions made to a file. This indicates how often files require modification and updating. Highly volatile files are not usually indexed, as this would entail excessive overheads by frequently updating the index and file itself. Indexing is used when the data is fairly stable. 2. File size. When files are large, serial sequential location techniques give longer access times. Thus, large files are usually indexed or saved as direct files. 3. User requirement. The main factor to concern most users is how they access the files. Batch access or interactive access. If they are happy to use batch access, then sequential file organization is likely to be appropriate providing the file activity is reasonable. However, if the user needs to operate interactively, then direct access will be required, which will mean indexed or hash-coded files. Minor criteria. The minor criteria for selecting a type of file organization are the type of storage device available, e.g., magnetic tape, will only allow serial sequential access, the ease or complexity of actually implementing the file organization technique with the data concerned, availability features, cost of software to handle the organization technique preferred according to other factors, the type of application, the method of processing or updating the files. We have three main types of file organization methods that are commonly used in business data processing application. These are sequential, indexed sequential, random. These file organizations are discussed in the next module. However, there are some other types of file organizations. These include pile, indexed, hashed. File naming conventions. File names are made up of a base name and an optional period and suffix. The first character of the name should be a letter, and all characters except the period should be lowercase letters and numbers. The base name should be 8 or fewer characters, and the suffix should be 3 or fewer characters, 4 if you include the period. These rules apply to both program files and default files used and produced by the program, e.g., Rogue, Serve. Some compilers and tools require certain suffix conventions for names of files. The following suffixes are required. C source file names must end in C. MS-DOS, OS2, and NT assembler source file names must end in ASM. Unix assembler source file names must end in S. The following conventions are universally followed. MS-DOS, OS2, and NT relocatable objects files names end in OBJ. Unix relocatable object file names end in O. Include header file names end in H. Yak source file names end in Y. Lex source file names end in L. The suggested order of sections for a program file is as follows. First, if the file is a prologue that tells what is in that file, a description of the purpose of the objects in the files, whether they be functions, external data declarations, or definitions, or something else, is more useful than a list of the object names. The prologue also contains authors, revision control information, copyright message, references, etc. Bitmap routines that operate on square bitmaps. See copyright Yoyodyne Enterprises. All rights reserved. Author John Smith. Header. Any header file includes should be the next. If the include is for a non-obvious reason, the reason should be commented. In most cases, system includes file like Studio H should be included before user includes files. Any defines and typedef that apply to the file as a whole are next. One normal order is to have constant macros first, then function macros, then typedef and enums. Next come the global external data declarations, usually in the order extends, non-static globals, static globals. If a set of defines applies to a particular piece of global data, such as a flags word, the defines should be immediately after the data declaration or embedded in structure declarations indented to put the defines one level deeper than the first keyword of the declaration to which they apply. Header files. Header files are files that are included in other files prior to compilation by the C preprocessor. Some such as Studio H are defined at the system level and must include by any program using the standard I/O library. Headers files are also used to contain data declarations and define that are needed by more than one program. Header files should be functionally organized, that is, declarations for separate subsystems should be in separate header files. Also, if a set of declarations is likely to change when code is ported from one machine to another, those declarations should be in a separate header file. Avoid private header file names that are the same as library header file names. The statement #include math h will include the standard library math header file if the intended one is not found in the current directory. If this is what you want to happen, comment this fact. Don't use absolute path names for header files. Use the name construction for getting them from a standard place or define them relative to the current directory. Header files should not be nested. The prologue for a header file should therefore describe what other headers need to be #included for the header to be functional. In extreme cases, where a large number of header files are to be included in several different source files, it is acceptable to put all common #includes in one include file. It is common to put the following into each H file to prevent accidental double inclusion: #ifn def example h, #define example h, / body of example h file, / end if / example _h */. This double inclusion mechanism should not be relied upon, particularly to perform nested includes. Other files. It is conventional to have a file called readme to document both the bigger picture and issues for the program as a whole. For example, it is common to include a list of all conditional compilation flags and what they mean. It is also common to list files that are machine dependent, etc. Summary. 1. File organization is the methodology which is applied to structured computer files. Given that a file consists, generally speaking, of a collection of records, a key element in file management is the way in which the records themselves are organized inside the file, since this heavily affects system performances as far as record finding and access. 2. If we divide the number of records that are accessed within a specified process or period by the total number of records in the file, we can calculate the file use ratio hit rate. 3. When files are large, serial sequential location techniques give longer access times. Thus, large files are usually indexed or saved as direct files. 4. File names are made up of a base name and an optional period and suffix. The first character of the name should be a letter, and all characters except the period should be lowercase letters and numbers. The base names should be 8 or fewer characters, and the suffix should be 3 or fewer characters, 4 if you include the period. This is the end of study section 7. Thanks for listening.